Tabletopped will start after the following messages.
Are you looking for something comfortable to wear and keep your brain warm while playing tabletop games? Daily Dose of Yarn makes handmade, customized beanies for all of your style and comfort needs. She can even help you with a custom beanie to represent your favorite character. Check out Daily Dose of Yarn on Instagram and Etsy to order your new favorite beanie today.
In a world headed for disaster, 5 strangers with mysterious pasts are thrown together by the winds of fate to try to stop the unseen forces that threaten to destroy their world. Relic of the Past is a novel-length story told via a clean, custom, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game. Find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever fine podcasts are found, and at poolmedia.podbean.com.
Snyder's Return is a tabletop role-playing game interviews and actual play podcast. We interview content creators, Twitch streamers, and fellow podcasters, and we put out our own actual play using a variety of different systems. So come and join us, come and have a listen. You can find us on Twitter at Return Snyder. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or check out our website at www.snydersreturn.squarespace.com.
This is Josh.
I'm Liwanika.
And I'm Glenn.
Tabletop Journeys is made up of a team of dedicated role players, storytellers, and friends. Together, we have more than 75 years of experience in countless role-playing game systems, and we love to share our passion with you.
We formed Tabletop Journeys to do what we love, create epic adventures in fantastic lands with amazing people. We bring our player-driven, story-first game style to everything we do. And no matter what game world you're playing in, detailed settings, heroic characters, vibrant NPCs, and a focus on story over rules can make any campaign legendary.
Be sure to subscribe to our podcast to check out our take on D&D 5e's core rules and ever-expanding content, and to explore other RPG systems and fresh new projects from indie content creators. Join the conversation and let us help you, player or storyteller, get the most out of your campaign's narrative, player characters, and NPCs.
You can also find our original content and rule supplements by searching for Tabletop Journeys on DM's Guild, Kickstarter, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back to Tabletop, everyone. If you've listened to any episode before, you know that I am a huge fan of Monster of the Week, a TTRPG that uses the Apocalypse World based system or powered by the Apocalypse based system. And I have a huge special guest today that I'm very excited for all of you to listen to. It is the creator of Monster of the Week, Michael Sands. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. Yeah, we're all huge fans of your work. I ran my first full campaign in Monster of the Week.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm really excited to have you on because the system, I feel like, is so unique in that a lot of TTRPG systems are very complex, but you've sort of distilled all of the elements you need in a really great TTRPG down to a really simple, easy to get into, easy to play game. And I would really love to hear how you started out kind of creating this system.
Well, I mean, that kind of gets to one of my things I want to do when I'm designing. Like, I don't think any game it should always be the minimum complexity needed, right?
Yeah.
No extra stuff. In terms of how I got to Monster of the Week, I mean, it's kind of a weird one because I'd been developing it for a while prior to the release of Apocalypse World.
Mm-hmm.
So it had its own separate system. When Apocalypse World came out and played it, I suddenly realized, Vincent Baker here has solved several of the problems I've been wrestling with my own design. I kind of immediately started taking what I had and kind of smushing it together with the ideas from Apocalypse World to kind of create what ended up being Monster of the Week as you know it.
That's amazing. And did you, when you started, what was your philosophy of, because Monster of the Week also does something that I think is super interesting, where there can only be one of each archetype in any sort of game that you're running, and you have distilled all of these archetypes down to their core, where it feels amazing to play in any of them. Even in a non-powered class like the Mundane, you still feel super active in the game, and you feel like you have a role to play. What was your philosophy around like a player's role within RPGs when you were designing, and just how do you think about that generally?
Well, I mean, that you touched on one of the main things, which is like everyone's character should play a full part in whatever game you're playing, right? So that's pretty critical. And also because, especially with Monster of the Week, because it's hitting that kind of episodic mystery where each episode, you know, you're going to have to do some investigation, some talking to people, some, you know, some chasing down things, and probably some fighting with monsters.
Right.
That gives a kind of a natural place where you can split out the abilities between characters quite easily. Mm-hmm. But also, on top of that, I would say probably like 80% of the design work in Monster of the Week was getting all the character classes right.
Yeah.
So making sure the hunters all felt right and felt like they had their own thing, could contribute, and also like cover a range of characters, because I wanted to make sure they kind of encompass an archetype more than a particular single thing.
And when you were trying to consider like which archetypes to create, was it just sort of going back to the like genre fiction within the Monster of the Week kind of genre and picking out?
Oh, it absolutely was.
Yeah.
It was looking back at Buffy, at Supernatural, at the X-Files, Fringe, all those kind of original shows that kind of brought this genre into being. Really.
Yeah, it's really incredible how each of these archetypes lend themselves to really great story moments so I ran a full year campaign where I kept the same characters. I know in Monster of the Week there is a really great ability for players to switch out characters if they get too high level. You can retire to safety, and also because they're dealing with horrible monsters all the time, there's a high possibility of death as well, so they can always change in that way if the story kind of calls for it. But I was able to keep 3 players in their original characters all the way through, and we had like huge story change moments that even in certain moments we actually had to change classes in a little bit to kind of really show the evolution of these characters, and it was so seamless. I thought that was really amazing. Did you ever like consider players switching between archetypes as games went on, or were they always meant to be sort of set in one kind of?
No, that's definitely an important thing. And I think that you do, like you said, that when you take your character you've been playing for a long time and like you feel like, okay, now their story's taking them to be this different class, like that's always a pretty significant thing. Mm-hmm. And I'd say it's probably more common than people retiring characters, or because one of the other options you can do is make a new character and have both of them.
That always felt like really intimidating to think of, like the running 2 characters at once. I sort of told my players like, let's try not to do that because I was like nervous as my ability to like cope with it. But it seemed like a super awesome option for folks too.
Yeah, I don't think it's for everyone, but it can be quite fun. In one of the first Apocalypse World games I played, I did take that, and I ran 2 characters for a while. It was kind of a mix of, like, sometimes I'd just play one of them and the other one would not be interested in what's going on. Mm-hmm. Other times, like, they might both be contributing in different ways to whatever the group was doing. So yeah, it is a bit of extra work, but it can also be pretty rewarding.
Yeah, I bet. It's such a cool story element that you can add in too, of like, oh, this story that we're telling needs a new element, and so I'm going to bring in another character that I'm playing. Is a very cool option.
Yeah, actually, particularly in that game, because my original character was, I don't know if you know the Apocalypse World classes, but my original character was a battle babe who's like the sexy badass. Yeah. And not very good at much else. And the second character was a savvy head who's kind of like an inventor and mechanic. So they kind of naturally had quite different interests.
And they also kind of work together really well, because you could have the kind of metalhead making gear for the battle babe if you needed it, and like you can synergize those abilities pretty well because they are so different, I bet.
I could have. I don't think that the character ever had an interest in building weapons for the others.
That's great. I love that. It's like, oh man, is Mike gonna min-max? And that's like, nope, they both are completely uninterested in each other.
They kind of were, yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. One thing that I found really interesting and so different from some other more rules-heavy TTRPGs was that Monster of the Week allowed, and I think a lot of apocalypse systems are kind of rely on this as well, but it allows everyone to create reality on the fly. There's like a lot of passing the narrator baton back and forth. And one thing that I really loved is that players could pretty much any time be like, I go to this pizza shop and I know like Joe, the manager, and like it's called, I don't know, like Cosmic Pizza, and we go in and like they know me because I always order from here or something. What was your philosophy around the player's role within an RPG to kind of create the worlds around them? And like, did you embody that philosophy within the game when you were designing it?
Yeah, well, again, that's another thing that was articulated very clearly in Apocalypse World, where Baker wrote, you know, one of the things you do when you're the MC of Apocalypse World is ask the players questions about the world and then use those answers. And I kind of carried that over to Monster of the Week. But honestly, I already did that a lot. You know, it's I've always, or at least for a long time, been a fairly collaborative person when I'm in the Game Master's seat. So, you know, if someone said, you know, my character wants to look up an old contact, you know, my response would be, okay, who's this contact? Where do you know them from? All that sort of thing, which is exactly the same kind of world building. It's just kind of making it a bit more of a systematic instruction of, you know, here's a good way to do this, and share out that creative load. Yeah,
I think that is really poignant, like just across all TTRPGs, like you said, because I feel as though when you have too strong of a centralized narrator, that it can start to disempower players, like especially players when they're in a story, and you just feel like a sense of being just separated from the story as more of like a witnesser rather than a creator. And I think that it's really nice when you are able to. Yeah, and honestly, the strength of role-playing games is that, like, you know, you are all equals in it. I mean, obviously there's a tradition that kind of the Game Master or Dungeon Master comes to the table with, like, here's what we're going to do. But even within that, you know, everyone's doing their chunk of making the story happen and the game happen. Yeah. And I think it's important to remember it's not like only one person has the authority to say what's going on. Yeah. You know, we're playing a game and enjoying ourselves, and everyone gets a chance to contribute. Yeah, and I think that the one thing that I felt so strongly when I was running Monster of the Week was the joy of collaboration, because it was constantly like, I would start talking about something that was happening, and then my players would start kind of adding on to it by bringing in things that they had built in the world or were developing or just had created out of, like, you know, full cloth kind of thing. And it always felt like so exciting, not only to be like, oh, this thing that I had planned or this thing that like is exciting to me is coming up that I want them to experience, but also what are they going to bring up, and like, how is that going to completely change what we're doing? And that's so exciting. Yeah. I mean, that's what I love about that philosophy, play to find out what happens, you know. Yeah. To come into it not in the kind of traditional sense of, you know, I've brought along a story and they're going to go to this place and meet this person and then that place and do this thing. But instead just to kind of come in saying, okay, I know what's happening right now, and we'll just let it run and see what happens. Which I just find just more exciting. Yeah, no, totally. I totally agree. Do you ever come in, because when I built my world, I sort of built it with sort of a, not a big bad, but that there was a root cause to what was happening in the world. And I knew that eventually that the players were going to have to come up against this root cause and try to figure out how to deal with it. So I had that sort of in the background. And then from week to week, just like in how the manual kind of tells you, I created monsters, gave them assignments, essentially built the world clock, and then just ran it and saw what happened. Do you ever come in with like more than that, or do you always leave it super open?
I usually leave it pretty open.
Yeah.
Typically, when I start a game, I'll come in with a first mystery, which is not really implying anything else about the world, like something quite self-contained. Then I'll see what characters everyone makes and use that to kind of build whatever comes next.
And you've built in like a great kind of cheat into the game as well for GMs, where in your session 0, they all have to, ask each other questions and like and essentially that entire session 0 that it has you run in the manual is just a great like mining opportunity for the keeper to just be like, okay, this is important, this is interesting, and just steal everything.
Yeah, and that's why it's there. It's so you don't need to come up with any of that other stuff beforehand. You can get the group as a whole to generate all the stuff that they're going to be interested in.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing is, like, when you bring in a concept for some kind of evil plan that's going to destroy the world, and they don't know about it yet, it's never going to be as grabby as when you build that plan out of, one person says, oh, I made a dark pact with something horrible, and someone else says, oh, I've always had an enemy of these kinds of monsters. And like, if you kind of can build all those things together, then suddenly everyone's already part of what's going on.
Yeah, it sort of gives ownership. I think ownership is so important, and like exactly what you just said, everyone feels as though they have the writer's pen and are directly creating together. And on that kind of line, what do you think that players like owe to one another, and what do they owe to the keeper or the GM in other games? Like, how do you think everyone is supposed to kind of collaborate in order to tell the best story possible and to have, I guess, the most fun? Like, what do players and the keeper owe to each other?
To me, what you need to do is kind of like make a real effort to take part in the game, and take part in a way that it's not necessarily like trying to make it interesting, because I think if you try too hard to be super interesting all the time, it can fall flat. But it's more like be honest to what your character is, combined with, make sure everyone gets their chance to do the same thing. And more broadly, like for the person in the keeper or game master's seat, they're there to play a game and have fun too. So they also need a chance to do their thing and have fun. And I think a lot of times people kind of forget that part of it, and think, this person's just here to provide the story for everyone else to enjoy, whereas really you're all there for that. And everyone's kind of got a role to play in like supporting the whole group to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, I've talked about this in some previous episodes too, where it feels like as a player you have a base responsibility to dig the story. Like in the Monster of the Week manual, it's like you have to be the biggest fans of the player characters. Like you have to really love what they're into and what they're up to. And you want to see more of that. And I think that also goes the other way, that the players are always supposed to be like, this is like, I want to see what happens. Like we want to figure this out together. Because if they try to take a back seat and have something told to them, I always feel like it really slows tempo down, especially for me in the game. Tempo is so important.
Yeah, I also noticed this with people talking about playing Monster of the Week and building characters to like have lots of armor and things like that and like protect themselves. And I feel like that attitude to play is kind of rooted in a sense of, the other side's there to try and get you and trick you or something. Whereas I think Monster of the Week is a game where, rather than worry about that, what you should be doing is going, my character's going to do their thing. It's probably going to go really badly for them a lot of the time. And I'm here to enjoy what happens and try and pull them out of it. Rather than, have them do their thing without really being in danger. That's not something that I feel is part of all those original media, right? It's, even watching the X-Files, they're tough, they know what they're doing, but they're often in danger as well. It's part of it is the things going badly and recovering.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the genre that you want to lean into, like the genre theme, I guess, that you want to lean into is that people are scared, but they do it anyway. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that's like so core to the genre.
Yeah. That and all those sorts of considerations, not just I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like another thing that comes up all the time is we can solve this problem, but the cost is really horrible.
Yeah. My favorite part of the 2d6 system is that, like, just statistically, you're going to roll 7 and 8s more than any other number. And so that always gives the keeper a opportunity to put a little bit of their spin on what happens.
Yeah.
Which is just so much fun. It's always so much fun because you can be like, yes, you do it, but like this also happens.
Yeah. And I think that's why in so many Powered by the Apocalypse systems, they keep that original dice system. Because honestly, like, there's nothing requiring it, right?
Yeah.
It could be any old dice system which allows you to have full or mixed successes because it's so simple.
Yeah.
There's no reason to change it.
Yeah, it's great. Like I have a friend who plays City of Mist who also runs a 2d6 system, and he was just like, D20 systems are just like so unattractive to me now because after playing with this system for so long, it's just so easy. I never want to go back.
Yeah. But I mean, there are a few people who've messed with it. I mean, Blades in the Dark ultimately started as kind of based on it, and that's got a quite different dice system, but it still captures that full success, partial success, miss sort of vibe.
Right.
And Ironsworn does something quite different too. Oh, I can't remember exactly how it works, but you essentially roll, I think, 3 or 4 dice, and some of them are like how well you do, and some of them are what complications occur.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So so essentially you're always getting complications because there are dice dedicated to that.
Yeah, and like what it rolls is like what sort of complication it is. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that because that is like
Ironsworn's got a lot of really interesting stuff in it.
Yeah, it kind of is prickling an interest I didn't know I had. There's also another game, I forget exactly what it's called. It's sort of like Misspent Youth or something like that. And it's essentially like punk rock ttrpg where you're these like young rebellious kids who are trying to take on the man. And the way that dice system works is that you still are rolling 2d6, but every time you roll, you are basically claiming one of the numbers from 2 to 12. And if you land on if you essentially roll a number that has already been claimed by the man or the opposition, then you lose the encounter. And so you're constantly trying to like lay claim to the most rolled parts of the thing in your scenes. It's a very interesting system that also is like just it's a different feel completely.
Yeah. I think I've read through it once, but not played.
Yeah. Definitely worth a swing through. I think especially it feels sort of adjacent to Monster of the Week genre-wise, so I think that you'd really dig it.
Yeah, no, I think the author was definitely like involved in some of the same kind of formative internet communities that in indie RPGs that gave rise to Monster of the Week and my work.
So when you built this, what was your hope that people would get out of the games? Like, what kind of, in your imagination, what is like the perfect Monster of the Week session for keepers, for players? Like, what should people expect to get out of a session when they sit down to play?
I was really hoping to recapture like the excitement I felt when, I sat down and watched, my first few episodes of X-Files or Buffy or Supernatural, just that sense of danger, the sense of familiarity with the creatures being generated from folklore and urban legend, and that 40-minute TV show arc of like, here's the problem, here's an ad break, here we're digging deeper and figuring out what's going on, then there's another ad break, and then a final confrontation where you sort everything out. That kind of, it was very much the goal all the way through, to just kind of capture that feel.
And it's so interesting too, because when I wrote for it, like when I would try to prep sessions and like make sure everything was all set for when I sat down at the table, it really did make way more sense to think of it in episode and season like arcs, I guess, because it fits really well, where you can have something that you kind of, as the keeper, kind of imply that there's something else going on, but there's this immediate threat that everybody has to deal with. Which is always works like super well.
Yeah. And I'm kind of a fan of episodic games just because I'm used to running both at conventions and like single shot short games, and also my regular gaming crew, like we're all middle-aged, we're all busy, so like quite frequently one or two of us won't be able to make a game, so, and that's been true for 15 years. So being able to like easily set aside someone and say, okay, they're just not here this week, and run an adventure as it is quite handy.
Yeah, it's like very easy to do too. It's like, oh, the mundane's in school, sorry. Yeah. Another thing that I thought was so fun is that all of the powers felt, going back to what you said about how you hope that people get that feeling of danger and excitement out of the game. Yep. Even some of the powers just are dangerous to use. Like, I had a great time with one of my players who took I think it's the Divine's teleportation ability. It's like the wings one. And you designed that as like a really funny trick, I think, because the design of it is like, if you roll great, then it's going to be a crazy good ability that will essentially make you very overpowered. But here's the catch. It never works.
Yeah.
So we had these moments where like it became sort of like an in-game joke where he would be like, okay, I'm trying to teleport us out of here. And then we would all kind of groan because we knew that he was either going to roll a failure or like a partial failure. And then like, who knows what that would mean? It could mean that somebody was all the way across the country, or it could be like, in a lake or whatever.
Yeah. And then that's kind of conscious with a lot of those things that, I did want the characters to be awesome. The Divine in particular, obviously. But they also, they've also got to have problems happen. I say, you want to see bad things happen to them so you can see how they get out of them, or don't.
Right.
And so that's built into all the moves as well. It's, like I say, it was most of the design was just getting all that stuff right. And for the moves, like when I was writing them, I wanted the player to sit down with, they'd say, okay, I'm going to pick this class, maybe the professional, and I wanted to sit down with the move list and where it says you pick 2 or 3 of these and not be able to decide because they wanted all of them. Like every single one should be so good that you're like, oh, I've got to have that one. Now, I don't know if I kind of ultimately achieved that, but that was kind of what I was aiming for, and I think that is what gives a lot of the characters a lot of personality and the ability to do awesome stuff, but also to have bad things happen to them that fit with who they are.
Yeah, I think that you definitely achieved it because you also give the player archetypes the chance to take moves from other other classes as they develop. So it really does become a thing of like, this is who my character is. We kind of know that a little bit now because we've been playing for X amount of time. I think it makes sense for my X archetype to have this other ability because it just makes sense for them in game. And so you do, I think, really... Even though you make it a lot harder to choose, because then you're like, oh man, not only do I have like 6 other abilities in my class that I want, I have all of the other ones to choose from as well.
Yeah. Although I feel like by the time people are picking from other playbook moves, they probably have an idea what they want. Mm-hmm. So they're not really looking at the whole list. They're more, I want to be able to do this thing. How can I find a way to do that?
Yeah, and I think that because that's exactly what happened with this player. He was the expert, but he was essentially like a person who was dropped in from another dimension and was trying to figure out what was going on. And so he had this like history of being able to teleport in his previous dimension. And so he just slowly was figuring out how to do it again in this new reality.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, right. And it just leads to some really awesome moments because, yes, he failed all the time. It was kind of a joke. But then there was this one moment where there's like a rift between realities closing and someone had to stay behind to push the button to do it. And I had given them like an NPC to like leave behind to do that. But instead he was like, no, I'm staying behind. I'm going to push the button. And everyone was like, had this really huge emotional moment.
Yeah.
And then he hit the button and then he rolled the teleport to see if he could get to the rift in time. And this one time he rolls a 12 and everybody went nuts. And it was like the perfect moment.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that it's really great.
I said those moments are great when that happens or something like that.
Is there a playbook from Monster of the Week that you kind of hold near and dear as like, this is the one that I'm proudest of?
Probably the Searcher and the Snoop. In both cases because they're kind of doing their own thing and perhaps not looking to only use violence to solve problems.
I think that is very interesting too because I actually had a writer on the podcast a little while ago who was talking about how with D&D starting out as sort of a dungeon crawling combat system and a lot of other war games that kind of slowly transitioned into TTRPGs, that we've sort of grown accustomed to using violence to solve all the problems. And it's literally built into a lot of systems that violence is going to be the way that this ends. And I think that exactly like you said, there's a lot of diversity of ways to solve problems in Monster of the Week. Like the mundane, like maybe they have a bat, but they're not built to go toe to toe with anybody. They literally get experience and points for going in and just like convincing other people to get out of danger. Yeah, I think it's such an interesting way to design.
Yeah, and honestly, it's kind of quite a big interest for me at the moment. I'm finding I really want to do more of figuring out play which is non-violent and is about other ways to deal with things. I did a tryout of Cortex Prime setting called Hammerheads recently, which was really fascinating. That's kind of inspired by the old Thunderbirds TV show, in which you're like international rescue workers who are called into disasters to save people. So there's not really any violence in that at all, except for whatever catastrophe has happened. And we had a great time playing that. We had like a situation where a volcano was erupting and they needed to help evacuate a town. And that was the scenario, but it was really exciting and fun. And I think there's a lot of range for other games to investigate, stories that aren't about, beating up a bad guy. Basically.
Exactly, yeah. I think that like that sort of asymmetric, like you versus the environment is like such an interesting way to do it as well, because it kind of is already, and I think that it slowly breaks down those barriers you were talking about earlier, where people feel like the keeper or the GM in a game is out to get them, and if it's, you know, a volcano exploding, then it's not really about that. It's just like this person providing you situational information, and like I think it could promote a much more collaborative experience. Was that your experience when you played it?
It was, although it's not that impersonal, because in that setting, like when you set up a disaster, it effectively acts like a big, horrible boss monster. Right. Even if it is a volcano, like you stat it up the way you'd stat up an enemy in another game. One of the things Cortex does is it's quite a abstracted and flexible system, so you can kind of make that work. But yeah, it didn't quite feel impersonal, but it still felt different.
Yeah, right.
And there was definitely the sense of everyone against this force of destruction.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because Monster of the Week inside our campaign arcs, between every sort of season, I would give them like a little interlude where they could just develop relationships that they had built, because I kept it within this one small town called Lakewood. And so they were constantly meeting people, developing relationships. One of them was a college student, so went to school and had classmates. One of them ran a bookshop and had employees and things like that. And I found that those were some of the most exciting, meaningful episodes that we had throughout the whole thing, because they were still using their skills, their powers, and everything like that. But it was all in this kind of social, dramatic way, instead of sort of a combat-oriented way. And it was just really, really cool. So I think that you're right, that there is a lot of rich moments and design in there that I'm excited if you get into, because I would love to see what you're working on.
I can give you a little preview of that if you'd like. I'm in the middle at the moment of working on a new game, which is currently called Xenogate Expedition 13.
Okay.
It's not the first name it's had. It's kind of inspired by Stargate.
Okay, which is a great place to draw inspiration from. It's an awesome show. I used to watch that all the time as a kid.
But in this one, you're a scientific expedition from Earth, and you've gone through one of these gateways to another planet, and then it's stopped working, so you're stuck there. So you've basically got a little bit of a home base there, and you're going to be out exploring the galaxy, and you'll encounter a horrible evil empire who is up to no good. But because you're a scientific expedition, you don't have any soldiers or weapons or anything. You've just got scientific instruments and survival gear. So the gameplay is going to end up being much more like going out and like making alliances with the other people and aliens you'll meet, and also kind of more like MacGyver style tricking and using cunning schemes to deal with your enemies rather than fighting them. So yeah, that's where my mind's at the moment.
Your elevator pitches already got me sort of like, I'm already building scenarios like, oh my god, this sounds amazing. Because I think that is also it. You've kind of landed on something that is the most fun thing, at least to me, when I'm a player in these games, is how can I outwit can I figure out a weird solution to this problem that isn't just mechanically like I stab with dagger?
yeah, and that's kind of what I'm trying to encourage. I'm not sure I'm there yet. I'm just kind of getting ready to do a playtest with the latest version of it, but I'm hopeful.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's really cool, because the same writer friend who came on quite a little bit of time ago was super interested in how these games also allow us to develop our views upon ourselves and the world as well. So like through that game, it sounds like you are taking some sort of, feeling, moral compass, ideology, whatever, through the gate with you, and then you're landing in this other place where you're going to have to kind of put all of those ideas to the test when you're not within the civilization that has supported and grown that moral compass and ideology. And I think that too could
that's
just
exactly
really
it.
bring a bunch of interesting stuff.
Yeah, I hope so. And I feel like it is. I'm just wondering if a lot of people will come to the game and like their first reaction will be, I'm going to build a laser rifle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is always that impulse, right? Where you're like, oh man, I'm super outgunned. I'm going to turn this tree into like a gun.
Yeah. But no, I'm hoping that instead they'll like reverse the polarity on something and force the enemies away.
I think that also is like a lot to do with the person running the game too. Like that has to be a decision that they make, because even in Monster of the Week you can do like a no guns game, and you can do like you can change whatever you want essentially as the keeper. And I think that in this new system it does sound like it's gonna, like, if you want to play a session where they're going to make a laser rifle and then just Rambo this evil empire, then like, I guess so, but you can also completely, go the other direction and just tell your players like, that's not really going to happen.
I don't think there's any reason that you'd stop them doing it. There are a couple of game system reasons not to. I have put a rule in there that basically, if you're fighting, you automatically take more consequences from anything that happens.
Yes, I love that.
Just to represent the danger of it. Plus, the evil empire you're fighting will be far and away more high-tech than the expedition is at the start, which also provides a disadvantage. So, in fact, going up and fighting them directly is doomed, at least at the beginning. Whereas, like, if you trick the bad guys, all their advanced technology won't help them if you fool them, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's actually a story that I really love that I read somewhere about how in World War II, the Allies were like very desperately trying to protect their bases in Egypt, and they didn't want the Nazis to bomb the cities, especially with all the artifacts and things like that were there from historical, being there. So they hired an illusionist to actually build essentially an array of mirrors, like a few miles to the west of the city, so that from the air, and they would like light up these mirrors so that they reflected light in such a way that it looked like a different city was over there. And so then the Nazis, when they bombed the mirrors instead of the city, which was great.
Yeah. Oh, and there was the inflatable tanks they put up all over England too.
Yes. There's actually like a whole division that I think is so interesting, where during the war they just started recruiting a bunch of artists into what was called, I think, the Ghost Legion. And it was just basically they hired artists of all kinds to do exactly that. They made like inflatable tanks. They made like propaganda posters. They just basically tried to out art and use that to make the war effort more successful, which is just like very, kind of hurts my brain when I think about it.
Yeah.
One other thing that I'm really interested in is that with each of these archetypes, it allows for a level of specialization that you don't really see in a lot of other games. Do you think that other systems would benefit from allowing players to hyper specialize or to completely kind of take their character in whatever direction that they want? Or is it really best suited for like specific genre types of games and like stories that you can tell with like Monster of the Week?
I think that the answer to that question does depend on the game you're playing. When I'm looking at a game design, I'm always thinking like, it's not just about what the system gives you, it's like, what are you trying to get out of it as well? So I think, in a sense, some games it makes sense for people to be more similar. Maybe if you take an example, the science fiction game Traveller, where everyone's kind of space vagabonds who were previously in the military, is a typical sort of game. It kind of makes sense that people aren't super specialized in that setting. But yeah, as you say, a strong genre, particularly stuff based on like ensemble dramas. Yeah. It kind of does make much more sense for each person to have their own thing they're good at. So yeah, I think the answer to that is really like, what does this game need to do what it wants to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one thing that you said that kind of sparked a question that I've always had for you, and this is, a great time to ask it, is within your archetypes, you have a couple like the Divine and the Chosen One that feel very main character-y, but the game itself is very ensemble based. How do you find like to balance those things within your games, and do you have like some thoughts on that, I guess?
Well, I think you can have an ensemble where each of the characters has an equal part, even when the story says this person's the one it's all about. Buffy's an example of that, right? I mean, she's the chosen one. The show's called Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but like all the other characters get a lot of screen time as well. So yeah, I don't see a huge tension there. And I think what it says is when someone takes one of those classes that kind of puts them in the spotlight, they're saying, yep, I'm going to be in the spotlight and have the story revolve to an extent around me. But I don't think that detracts from everyone else taking part.
Is there any advice you have for folks? Like we talked earlier about how players should lean in, and I think that is definitely just broadly good advice. But when you're as a group going to attempt to undergo one of these campaigns where you are taking one of these archetypes that are very central, they're essentially plot centric, that you are the middle of the plot that things revolve around, how would you suggest for the characters around that character, and then also the character that takes it, to balance the game in a way that everyone is still feeling super involved and having a really good time?
I think the thing is to just be conscious of who's had the time in the spotlight amongst the group. Because you can always... Well, certainly the keeper gets to choose who they ask what you do next. What do you do next? So that's one way to do it. So the keeper should always be balancing who's had turns, who's had the attention, and everyone else should be just working within that thing. The Chosen One's a good example. So, okay, we've got a Chosen One, they've got a special destiny, but each individual mystery, everyone's still got an equal part to play. In fact, the Chosen One at the beginning is usually not that good at dealing with problems alone. They start off with like the potential to be really awesome, but not there yet. So I think that if you're conscious of like things like that, then you can see, okay, yeah, we do need the whole group working together. And I think that's always true, really. So yeah, just think about not just like the surface of, oh, the story's about the Chosen One or whatever, but think about, okay, here we are telling the story. Let's make sure everyone's getting their turn to shine, to do something awesome, to enjoy themselves. Yeah. And yeah, I, in a lot of ways, I think it's like, maybe it's something like being a good sports person, play fairly, give everyone a chance, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I also think that one thing that you mentioned a while ago too is like, if you actually lean into the genre and all those inspirations that you listed off before, the person who is usually the chosen one usually cares about everyone else way more than basically anything.
That's also true, yeah.
Yeah, so like you always have to be remembering that you as a player should also in some ways be a huge fan of the other players as well, and so you're also interested in what they're going to do and how they affect the story.
I can't even remember. I don't think my player agenda in Monster of the Week does say that you should be a fan of the other hunters, but it should. I think it just says it in the keeper side. But yeah, no. It should definitely be that everyone in the group is there to be a fan of what's happening, and should be doing everything they can to make sure everyone is enjoying themselves.
Yeah. I also think that there's a lot, because like I was talking to somebody and kind of evangelizing Monster of the Week, and they were saying like, why would I ever pick anything except for the Chosen One or Divine or one of the more combat powerful characters? And I was like, because you're losing so much of all the other stuff.
That's right.
There's like, I mean, I mean, like, I think that every single person in my gaming group that I've talked to is just really drawn to the Flake. Because it just is such a cool, like, weird little role that you play within the group, and it's just like looks so much fun. So I think that, like you said, even if you're choosing one of those to be more plot centric, it might also mean that you are kind of useless at times, and you just have to take your back seat when you reach that moment in the mystery.
There's also part of that, though, too, is that being useless in a game like Monster of the Week can lead to really good fun.
Yes, exactly.
When a character who's bad at something tries it anyway, and it goes horribly wrong, that leads to some great moments.
Yes.
And I think, learning to, like, accept my character's going to fail, bad things going to happen, and I'm just going to have to roll with it and see what fun can come out of it is something that's really helpful to remember.
Yeah.
When you're playing any role-playing game, really, but particularly something that's kind of character-centric like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like so important, especially to remember as a keeper as well, is that you have to make you can never punish. You can punish the character, but you can never punish the player for doing something that they weren't good at, because that's like the best thing that they could possibly choose as a player when it comes to dramatic tension, right?
Yeah. I think also there's a thing that as a keeper, like, if you make something horrible happen to a character, you're not necessarily punishing them. It's more like you're tempering them or forging them or something. You're like, like, here's a horrible thing. How are you going to cope with it? What are you going to do about it? It's like a chance for them to show where their heart is,
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the mechanics of the game support that completely too, because you gain experience when you screw up rolls, and as you get more experience, you get more powerful. So you're learning. Essentially, the mechanics are saying you are learning from being in bad situations.
Yeah, although actually that experience on a miss, that's more there as a carrot. It's like, don't be afraid to roll something you're terrible at, because you'll get something.
Yeah, there's always something there. It's really funny. There's speaking of failures that I think that everybody really loved in my campaign, there was a moment where they were sort of like ushering this sort of spirit that they had found that had information that they were trying to glean from it, and they kind of like put it in the backseat of this car, like within this container. But they had also found this other spirit that was like very clearly trying to eat spirits, and then they got attacked by a monster and like left the car to go do it. And when they came back, there was just like an empty vessel and a very happy and full other spirit, and they were like, God damn it. So yeah, those are the best moments, right? Is when everyone like feels like, I was such an idiot.
Yeah.
So what are you, as we kind of come to the end of this conversation, what are you super excited about in the RPG space right now and in the designing space? We've already kind of talked about some stuff that you're working on, but is there other things that really has you excited about the medium or excited to play?
There's a lot, actually. My regular group, we're just coming to the very end of an extremely long game of The One Ring, where we've been playing through the Darkening of Mirkwood campaign for 7 years, I think, on and off.
Wow, that's amazing.
We've taken a lot of breaks, so it's not really 7 years of play, but it's still a lot. And that campaign is like 35 years in the history of the game, so it's a big chunk.
Wow.
So yeah, so
is it same characters, or have they gone through multiple characters throughout the span?
Some of the characters, one of the characters has been there from the beginning. The game has a mechanic where you can like designate an heir and hand over your adventuring career, and so we've had that happen with a few.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So we've been thinking about what to play next, and I've kind of been making a list of which games I'm feeling really excited about, and it's a sadly long list that's going to be difficult to work through.
Is there any ones that are at the top of the list that you're like, this game sounds amazing, or this one I've been wanting to play forever?
I've just opened up my list. At the top are RuneQuest and Fate of Cthulhu. So RuneQuest I played in the 1990s, the version that was around then, but I'm really in love with the current version that Chaosium are putting out. So I'm quite keen to play that. I particularly I recently picked up their 2 adventure collections and found them really fascinating because they're not your typical sort of fantasy adventure. One of them has the heroes taking part in a big religious festival and getting involved in all the games and rituals that are carrying on, which looks really fun.
Yeah.
And, that sort of thing. They're all quite community focused because one of the things about RuneQuest is that kind of sense of being part of your culture. So those look really fascinating. And Fate of Cthulhu I've been wanting to play for a while, which is a Fate core game from Evil Hat where you play time travelers from a cosmic horror apocalypse who've come back in time to stop it, Terminator style.
That's so cool.
Which it just looks really, really neat.
Yeah.
And particularly because they've built, there are like 12 different apocalypses available for different scenarios you can be trying to stop.
Yeah.
And almost all of them look fantastic.
Is there one that's kind of like calling to you, apocalypse-wise?
Yeah, there is. There's one called The Rise of the Quiet, which is like a weird psychic contagion that starts taking over the world. That one looks pretty cool.
That does sound super cool.
I've also got a soft spot for their one, which is about Cthulhu, because a big chunk of it is set in New Zealand.
Oh, that's amazing. Cool.
Well, I think we're the big island closest to where Cthulhu is supposed to be lurking under the sea, so...
So you sort of like, by default, it has to happen in New Zealand.
Yeah. So those are probably the top 2 right now. And my playtest of my Xenogate Expedition game. That's...
Which you have to keep us updated on. If you ever if you're getting further and you want to talk about it more, please tell me. I would love to do an episode on it.
Let me just share you a link. There is actually a preview edition I put up on Itch a little while ago, which I can share with you.
Oh, amazing.
Which is...
Because actually... Yeah, my gaming group is also in that moment where we're just about to end a lot of long-term campaigns and we're starting to get into like, what other systems do we want? So I'll definitely take a look at this. Maybe we can run it for a little bit.
So this preview edition is basically a stripped down, minimal, like 4-page version of it. I kind of did this as a...
Cool.
An exercise to focus my thoughts when I was a bit stuck. So it's like the absolute minimum amount that you could have this game happen in. But it'll give you a bit of a sense of the style anyway.
Very cool. Thank you so much. That's a really great list of games. A lot of those I hadn't even heard of, so I have some research to do after this. The Fate of Cthulhu especially sounds amazing. I'm a huge fan of cosmic horror, so I'm down for that any day of the week.
It actually, I'd got very bored of cosmic horror too. I felt like it was...
Interesting.
Well, there's been so much Lovecraft and Cthulhu stuff, especially in role-playing, that I kind of felt like, I've done enough of it. But Fate of Cthulhu has something. It brings something new to it all.
Yeah, the thing that I like about cosmic horror isn't so much like there's a giant monster under the sea that's going to come up and eat you, or in like some of the more Cthulhu focused stuff. But the thing that I really love theoretically, I guess, or thematically, is the idea that there is something that we don't understand out there, and it is not good for us. Like, it is probably uncaring or whatever, but it is something that we have to try to deal with because it is inherently antithetical to our existence.
Yeah,
and
I think
that's kind of feeling of
that
being
feeling
small
is what makes cosmic horror work. Yeah, I'd also like. I can't really look past Lovecraft's racism anymore too, so I don't really want to be in that pool.
Yeah, no, for sure. I honestly, as soon as like, I did my research and I found out all of that stuff, I was like, man, you know what? All of his stuff was like too wordy anyway. Just kind of threw it all out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like very much we have to consider that stuff. And I think that's just the cosmic horror as well for me, I think is really, for me, I really hate when you get into a campaign, especially late in the campaign, where everyone is just essentially gods and there is nothing big. There's just the players. And I guess that there is a place for that. It's definitely power fantasy, but at the same time, it just kind of feels like, well, then there's no tension anymore. And it kind of feels it's just like the dramatic line goes slack a little bit for me.
I recently played some D&D 5th edition. We played through Curse of Strahd, and one of the things I noticed there is like, once everyone got to like level 8 or so, it just felt like the game, on one hand, the sense of threat just disappeared. And on the other hand, everyone had so many abilities and spells and things that it just got really complicated. And I don't think any of us really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think that's why I always kind of steer towards powered by the apocalypse systems as well, is because it doesn't give you too many tools. It's all about how you use your tools, and that is like infinite uses based on creativity, which I think is a lot more interesting anyway.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when we're role playing, because we are using our imaginations, it makes sense to lean strongly onto the imagination and that kind of fiction first way of thinking about things, of don't just look at the rules but also think, okay, what's going on in the situation of play, what makes sense to happen. That's the strength of it. So you should definitely always remember to keep that focus there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And finally, I would love to hear, is there anything you'd like to plug? Where can people find you if they're interested in you and your work? Anything like that. Like I said, I'm an evangelist for Monster of the Week. I'm going to continue to be. So that is been well covered. But what else have you got going on, and how can people support you?
Okay. Well, let me do a bit of a shout out for some other creators. Okay. Because down here in New Zealand recently, a group of us have got together to start up a kind of cooperative of people working in role-playing game design and streaming. Now that's all happening on kiwirpg.com, which is, the website's basically been set up so people can find all the different people involved in different games that are coming out. So that's definitely, if you like the sort of thing I do, that's a good place to check out to find other people from here who are doing cool stuff. And there's quite a range of things happening there, so plenty to check out.
And that's kiwirpg.com. kiwirpg.com. That's amazing. I'll definitely leave that in the show notes as well.
For my stuff, you can find what I'm doing over on genericgames.co.nz, which is where I post what games I'm working on, what news there is about me. To get Monster Week of stuff, you can also look at the Evil Hat Productions site about that. The exciting thing happening there is that we've got a new book coming soon for Monster of the Week called Codex of Worlds, which is full of alternate settings for Monster of the Week games, taking you into like historical and or fantasy realms, and also team playbooks, which are a bit like Blades in the Dark's crew sheets, allowing you to give your team a bit more of a focus and their own sort of story.
Dear listener, I have done a little bit of research into this, and it looks super rad. So definitely to like keep that bookmarked, because that's going to be a definite buy when it comes out as well.
Yeah, cool. Aside from that, I'm, like I said, working on the Xenogate Expedition game, and I've started going back to the next game I'm working on, which is about Age of Sail naval adventure along the lines of Hornblower and the Patrick O'Brien's Aubrey and Mataran books. So that's in the far horizon.
Very cool. I mean, what else can you want? You have futuristic sci-fi science teams. You have pirates, or the age of sort of sail and exploration. And you have more Monster of the Week on the way. It sounds like you're super busy. Thank you so much for coming on, Mike. This was amazing.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. That was another episode of Tabletopped, and we'll see you next week. Bye.